We're in Jude 7. All the way to 7. Already. I want us to remember that Jude is writing to believers. It's written for us to learn from. And he's writing to believers, and he's writing it to warn believers about apostasy. And we're in the midst of 3 examples of corporate punishment. We talked about Israel wandering in the wilderness in verse 5. Last week we talked about angels that sinned in verse 6. And today we're going to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah. These topics, because they are in Jude, require us to approach them from the standpoint of apostasy. Apostasy is not what I think of when I think about Sodom and Gomorrah, or when we talked about Israel wandering in the wilderness. I didn't think of that as apostasy, and we saw very clearly that apostasy was involved in that. We're going to see that today too. We've talked about apostasy. You know, I've misspelled apostasy, and y'all let me. I had a C right there.
We can't read your writing.
It's got an S. What kind of teacher am I? I can't even spell what we're talking about. So, we've talked about apostasy being a falling away, or maybe even a renouncing of beliefs that we once had. I think I must broaden that definition to mean rejecting of a belief, particularly for our purposes, rejecting the truth of God, whether you ever had it or not. We've talked about that, and we've always talked about apostasy being a falling away from something you already had. But we talked about Judas, for example, and he never had it. He never called Jesus Lord, but yet we called him an apostate. What he did was reject the truth of God. He rejected Jesus as Messiah, and that is what made him apostate. In verse 5, we consider the Israelites who left Egypt in the Exodus. Though they had expressed faith in God, they ultimately failed to trust in Him for their provision, trusting in what they could do only for themselves rather than what He could do for them. In their failure of faith, God punished them to wandering in the wilderness for the rest of their lives. What I actually said was, when we talked about this, I've written it down again, I want to say it again. No believer, or we talked about them wandering in the wilderness. They had faith by their act of putting the lamb's blood on the door, so they were saved, and then they fell away. What I said was that no believer can presume on God's grace. Apostates in the believing community, which is like you and me, stand with the Israelites' apostasy as a warning to all who think their initial commitment secured their future destiny. In other words, because I'm saved, because I express my faith in God and Jesus, does not give me the right to think that God will not punish me for rejecting Him in the future. That's how we become apostates. That's how the Israelites became apostates. That's how the angels became apostates. They rejected God at some point in the future. And it's not like the Israelites, they experienced 2 kinds of death. They died in the wilderness, but their salvation saved them into the future. They didn't lose it was not a spiritual death for them. Remember, and then what happened to them in the judgment can happen to us. We can be judged also. Remember Paul in 1 Corinthians 10:6. We're not going to look it up again, but he said those historical things with Israel were examples to us. And again in Jude 5, Jude says, I want to remind you of those things again. It can happen to those with faith in God also. So in answer to Blake's question, I'm saying all that because of the discussion we had around his question last week. So in answer to Blake's question about the applicability of the angels who sinned in verse 6, the answer is the same. Even if you are an angel on a supernatural level, God expects loyalty through faith and trust. Otherwise, you can expect discipline. And now today, we have to answer the same question. Today we're talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. We have to answer the same question. How does Sodom and Gomorrah fit into this for the church today? Remember again, Jude is writing to believers. The unbelieving, not the unbelieving world. For the most part, the people in this room, do not identify with Sodom and Gomorrah because of the type of their terrible wickedness. I want to read verse 7 to you now. Verse 7 in Jude. In a similar way, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding towns gave themselves up to sexual immorality and perversion. They serve as an example of those who suffer the punishment of eternal fire. We are going to see verse 7 in two dimensions. One is a prophetic is prophetic of the apostasy of the last days. We talked about that. Jude sees things happening in his time. He sees apostasy trying to creep into his church. But he's writing to us today and to us in the future because of apostasy that we may be experiencing and because of the apostasy of the church that we already know about is going to be here from Revelation 17. We usually think of apostasy being associated with doctrinal heresy. When we talk about apostasy, we're talking about some kind of flawed doctrine in the church or something like that. We don't usually link it to fleshly lusts. All right? That's what we're talking about today. I want you to remember that. We have already seen in verse 4 that certain men will turn the grace of God into lasciviousness, a license for immorality. And in verse 7 we will see that in verse 8, listen, this is what's coming up in the future. Today we're doing verse 7. But in verse 8 we're going to see that they will defile the flesh. In verse 10 we will discover that they corrupt themselves with brute beasts. That's animal. Verse 16, they will walk after their own lusts. So this apostasy is connected ultimately with sexual immorality. If you think of scripturally defined sexual immorality in the United States today, it is not a very large step at all to see the sexual perversion of Sodom and Gomorrah to be a parallel to what is going on in the United States today. But verse 7 is about more than homosexuality. I want us to get away from that. It is about homosexuality, but our lesson today is about scripturally defined sexual immorality and perversion. Sexual immorality is more than just homosexuality. It seems like we've talked about it for the last 6 months or maybe even longer. But it's not just the part that you and I are not guilty of. That's what I want us to realize. He would not say, this can happen to you. Well, it can't happen to me if we're just talking about homosexuality. If it can happen to me, it's got to be a lot wider net being cast than just that. So we need to think about this in terms of scripturally defined sexual immorality. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 10:6, again, I've said this again today already, and here it is again, that these events are examples to us. Their apostasy leads them to judgment. Okay, as we go there through these verses, we will discover as we go that apostasy begins. I want you to think about this and see if it makes sense to you, because you may have to think about it and maybe by the end of the lesson you'll say, yeah, I see it. But we will discover as we go that apostasy begins with intellectual doubts, but it is certain to end in physical degradation. It starts with intellectual doubts. And I read that, and I was trying to figure out what that means. And the only thing I could really come up with, and maybe we'll come up with something more by the time we get to the lesson, but I thought about creation. I thought about the flood. I thought about the Red Sea. All those things are big, 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 miraculous things. And which ones of the things in the Bible are the most questioned today? Those. The Red Sea didn't even come up as even a possible consideration. But the creation, 6-day creation, didn't happen. It's all about science. It's all about time being our friend. It's all about stuff starting and over billions of years it evolves to where we are today. It can't be the Bible. And then you get to the flood. It's not a worldwide flood. It wasn't a worldwide flood. It has to be something else. So what they do is basically take the human secularists take the first 11 chapters of the Bible and just chunk it as fables, okay, in storybook time. And what that does, that is the initial part I'm talking about of intellectual doubt. You take that part, take it out of the Bible, and what you're saying is God is not all that great. If he didn't do those things, he probably didn't do the rest of the stuff either. He didn't provide for the rest of the stuff either. So I'll just live my life like I want to. And it seems like it always, if you look at what's going on in the political world today, if you look at what's going on in America today, in business, it always ends up in sexual immorality of some kind. So we can say sexual immorality is not important, doesn't apply to us, we don't ever have to worry about it or anything like that. But it seems like that's where it ends up. I don't know if that's true or not, we'll see. Okay, Sodom and Gomorrah is usually considered as a yardstick for sin, meaning I'm not that bad. He decided to destroy the people because of that. I hadn't done anything like that. We consider it a yardstick for sin. In other words, that was the worst, for God destroyed a people because of it, yet they are referred to here as the subject of apostasy. We talk about Sodom and Gomorrah in terms of what their sin was. Today, we're talking about it in terms of what their apostasy was. Now, you think it's not going to be hard for me to teach. I've never thought of it in those terms. Apostasy implies that one once knew the truth. Now, think about that. What you know about Sodom and Gomorrah, did they ever know the truth? They did. We'll look at it when we get to their scripture for it. 3 events occurred. These events occurred about 450 years after the flood. One of the 5 cities of the plain, there's 5 cities of the plain that are going to be destroyed. It's these right here: Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela, or Zoar. Those are 5 cities that are going to be destroyed. But only one of them has been discovered by archaeologists, and that is Zor, whatever you want to call it. And that is the city that the Bible says that Lot fled to. And we're going to see that one of the main parts of the angel's job was to make sure that Lot was protected. In fact, we're going to look at it, but Lot even pled with him to, don't let me flee to the mountains, let me go to Zoar. And we're going to see that the angel relented, and he went there. So they think that that's why that city was not completely destroyed. The others are nowhere to be found, the other 4. Okay. The other cities are thought to be located at the southern end of the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is the lowest point on earth. Did y'all know that? It's the lowest point on earth. It's 1,286, who's counting? 1,286 feet below sea level. The Jordan River terminates. You can look on that map and see the Jordan River runs into the Dead Sea and terminates right there. So there's nowhere for the water to escape. You say, why didn't it just keep filling up and get bigger and bigger and bigger and deeper and deeper and deeper? The water evaporates. And as it evaporates, it leaves salts behind, and the water just keeps getting more and more and more impure as time goes on. In fact, I even read one account that area was rich in bitumen. There were bitumen wells there. They're still there under all that water, and it bubbles up through there, making the situation even worse. We'll talk about that when we get to it. But there's no outlet. We talk about the evaporation. It's about 40 miles by 10 miles, 40 miles long by 10 miles wide. The northern end is about 1,400 feet deep. Pretty deep pool of water, Wayne. The southern end is 10 to 20 feet deep, depending on, I guess, what time of year you measure or whatever. So it goes from 10 or 20 feet at one end to 1,400 feet at the other. Archaeologists believe, and the Bible supports, that this area has not always been like it is. I have never questioned that. As long as I've been reading the Bible, I've heard about the Dead Sea. People leave here to go over there. They swim in the Dead Sea. I'm sure they're not swallowing any of the water, but you know, you can just lay there and just float. You can even float. I've heard you can even float just like a cork bobbing in the water. It's so bad. But look at Genesis 13:10. Let's get this straight. Genesis 13:10. We're going to come back to this scripture again, but I just want you to look at it now. Genesis 13:10 says this. Lot looked up and saw that the whole plain, or this is where Abraham and Lot are getting ready to divide. Abraham gives Lot the chance to make his choice first. Lot looks up and saw the whole plain of the Jordan well watered like the garden of the Lord. That would be Eden. Like the land of Egypt, on the Nile and the Euphrates and all that, towards Zoar. He looked towards Zoar, and that's what he saw. Just a well-watered plain. Where does it say he saw the Dead Sea? That whole area around the Dead Sea is wasteland right now, today. But yet when Lot looked out before he made his choice, he saw the Garden of Eden. He saw well-watered everything. That's where he made his decision. But that's what he did. The Dead Sea, that area was not always like it is today. Something had to happen to cause that, and I think it's what we're going to talk about today. The southern end is called the Valley of Sodom. It's mentioned in 14:8. We're not going to look at it yet. But so it was a fertile area during the time of Abraham and Lot. God makes his promise to Abram in 12:1 through 5. The land he's going to give him and all that. And as the report goes in Genesis 13, let's look at, we're going to be in Genesis 13 for a while, so y'all just flip over there. Shouldn't have closed my Bible up. Genesis 13. Some interesting things here. Abraham had become a wealthy man. And he had livestock, gold, and silver. That's where his wealth was. In verse 6 and 7, presumably Lot was wealthy also because he had big herds. And his herd and Abraham's herd had gotten so big they were starting to commingle. It's causing problems with their shepherds because they having trouble keeping their sheep separate. So they said, we're going to have to split up. We need to separate. So Abraham gave Lot his first choice, and in 13:10, that's where Lot makes his choice. I already read that verse, but he looks up. He says he looked up. Do you see that? He looked up and saw this well-watered plain and said, I think I'll take that. Abraham gave me a choice. He wants me to choose, so I'm choosing that. Abraham lived in Canaan. But look, it says Lot looked up. He made his choice by sight. Okay, I'm gonna give you your choice. You got door number 1 or door number 2. Well, those two doors look alike. You can't really make your decision based on what's behind the door. You don't know what's behind the door. This was different. He had a choice between a well-watered plain and something else. It says he looked up and he made his decision by sight. Notice God was not in that choice. It's not saying that God was involved in that choice. He made that choice based on what he saw. 13:12 says that Abraham lived in Canaan. Well, let me just read 13:12. Let's see what that says. 13:12 says, Abraham lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain, which is those 5 cities, and pitched his tent near Sodom. Verse 13 says, now the men of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. So Lot went towards wickedness. They were already in the state that they were in at the judgment. He knew, he had to know it.
So we're to assume he knew that that's what was going on there.
He had to know, and we're going to see some more things we're going to see pretty quickly here. He had to know. He had to know. But he made his choice, and he went towards wickedness. And look at 18, what Abraham did. So Abraham moved his tents and went to live near the great trees of Mamre in Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord. Lot went toward wickedness. Abraham followed his custom and habit of worship. He built an altar to the Lord. Awesome way. Just because God, I want to get this straight before we go too much further. Just because God may not be in your choice, he was not in Lot's choice. But just because God is not in your choice does not mean that you're going to make a wrong decision. You may still end up doing the same thing that you would have done if God had been in the choice. Okay, now I don't want you to think that Lot was an unbeliever. Don't lose your place there in 13, but look at 2 Peter chapter 2. There's a lot of stuff in this book. I mean, a lot of stuff. 2 Peter chapter 2. Because this is not what you think. Yeah. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 7 and 8. Let me read this. And if he rescued Lot, a righteous man. Lot was a righteous man. Peter's going through several things here, but he says, Lot's one of them. He says, if he rescued Lot, a righteous man, who was distressed by the filthy lives of lawless men, for that righteous man living among them day after day was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. First thing, Lot was righteous. He looked up to make his choice, did not include God in his choice, but yet we know that the Holy Spirit has led Peter to say he was a righteous man. And not only that, we know what he dealt with while he was there. He knew what he was getting into. You want to say, why did he just leave? But we know, regardless of why he didn't leave, he was distressed by the conditions that he saw going on around him. That's what Peter says. Okay, we'll probably come back to that a little bit later too. But anyway, so God goes the extra step. After that, we're going to see that God goes after Lot twice. He delivers him twice. We need to look at chapter 14, so we can go back over there. We need to look at chapter 14 just a little bit in Genesis. Actually, we're going to look at all of it. But the first recorded war is there in the first three verses. We're not going to read it. It's a lot of names and places. But basically what's in the first 3 verses is that there's a group of 4 kings and there's a group of 5 kings. The 4 kings are from the lineage of Shem. The 5 kings are from the lineage of Ham. Noah had 3 sons, right? Shem, Ham, and Japheth. One of the sets of kings came from Shem. The 5 kings came from Ham. The interesting part is that I did not know until today is that those 5 kings are the kings over these 5 cities. These are the cities of the plain that are going to be destroyed. Not just Sodom. So anyway, there's 5 cities going to be destroyed. All right, they're called the cities of the plain, and these 5 kings that are going to end up being inspired. These are kings over these 5 areas right here: Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Bela or Zor.
Those are names of people.
No, those are names of cities.
Cities.
And these 5 kings are kings over these cities.
Kings of the cities.
Yeah, there's four other kings, and these 2 groups are going to get into a war. All right. But verse 10 indicates. Let me read verse 10. Chapter 14, verse 10. Now the valley of Sodom was full of tar pits, and when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some of the men fell into them, and the rest fell into the hills. That's just a little hint of what might have happened when God started destroying that area. These were tar pits, bitumen, very flammable stuff. Okay, I just wanted you to see that. King James says that it's actually says bitumen in King James, and it's a word from the Strong's Thesaurus that says bitumen or asphalt. Just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. Okay, it's very icky, gooey, flammable stuff, right there where the Dead Sea is going to be. All right, verse 11 and 12, let me read that. The 4 kings seized all, they have this war, and the 4 kings seized all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food, and then they went away. They also carried off Abraham's nephew Lot and his possessions, since he was living in Sodom. So you got the war. These 4 kings that were from the lineage of Shem fight the 5 kings from the lineage of Ham, defeat them, and they carry off spoils of war, and Lot just happens to be part of it. I guess it's probably his family was with him. I don't know, it doesn't say. But what happens is I think very interesting, Abraham hears about it. I want you to understand what Abraham's all about. Look at verse 14. Verse 14 says that when Abraham heard that his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his house, in his household, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. Just like that, Abraham could call up 318 trained guys. That's not like guys like me and Wayne and Blake and Gary. These are guys that know what they're doing.
I was wondering
how to kill. They know how to fight. Don't ask me to fight. I'm a lover, not a fighter. These guys, while they were probably good lovers too, they were fighters. They were trained to fight. Abraham could call 318. That's an army.
I can throw my pocket watch.
Yeah, well, I'm not going. Don't call me Abraham. I'm not going. So he's got 318 guys. Okay, now, verse 15 and 16, Lot gets rescued. Let's look at 15 and 16. During the night, Abraham divided his men to attack them, and he routed them, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. He recovered all the goods and brought back his relative Lot and his possessions, together with the women and the other people. So Abraham goes and gets Lot. He just recovers the spoils of war, basically. He gets Lot and whatever else is there. Then we get to verse 18 and 20. I want to go through this. I'll just comment as we go. I want you to note in verse 20 that that victory was provided by God. Let's look at 18 to 20. We're not going to spend a lot of time in this, but we studied a whole study time about Melchizedek when we studied Hebrews. He's an interesting guy. That's pretty much all we know about him right here. But then Melchizedek, king of Salem, is that how you pronounce that word? Somebody tell me. Salem, king of, you'd say Salem, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where do you think that is?
Jerusalem.
If you say Salem, you say, I don't know. What if I say Salem? Jerusalem. That's an ancient Canaanite city that becomes Jerusalem. All right. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, I could say Salem, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. That's where they made cigarettes. Brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed them, saying. So he is a king and a priest. Who do you know in the Bible that is a king, both a king and a priest? There's only one guy besides this guy. Who is it? Easy question. Jesus is the only one except this guy. This, if you hadn't figured it out by now, this is a theophany. Everybody thinks this is a theophany of Jesus Christ. You know, it's an appearance of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. And if you get over to Hebrews, I think it's Hebrews 7, it says that the genealogy of Melchizedek has no beginning and no end. Do you know that's got that kind of genealogy? No beginning and no end. It's been going on forever to the left, and it's going to continue going to the right. No, okay, so there it is. So he blessed be Abraham. Here's the blessing he gives. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High who delivered your enemies into your hand. So the blessing indicates that God is the one that provided the victory. You can't be thinking about, oh, how great you are. Don't get the big head, Abram. It's God that provides this victory. Then what's interesting is Abraham gives him he gives Melchizedek a tithe. What does that indicate? The superiority of Melchizedek to Abraham. You would think it's
Who is able to bless? Superior always blesses inferior. God blesses us. Why did he give bread and wine? Why didn't he come out there and give cool water and do a feast with vegetables, beef, and all this? Bread and wine.
oh, where have you heard that before?
My body, my blood.
See, there's lots of stuff here. We're not going to go through it all. I don't want to reteach Hebrews, but that is a special thing right there, and it's leading up to something else that I want you to hear right now, and that's in verse 20. Oh, I already said that. He gave him the offering. Now, look 22 to 24. The king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the people and keep the goods. So we got this meeting going on. That's how Sodom gets there, the king of Sodom. It's got this going on, and Melchizedek shows up. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to the Lord, God Most High. No, I'm sorry. Sodom said, the king of Sodom says, give me the people and you keep the goods for yourself. I need the slaves. I don't want to take them back. And you keep the goods. Then in 22, Abraham says to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to the Lord. I have sworn to the Lord, he says, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and have taken an oath that I want you to listen to this for contempt. I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the thong of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, I made Abraham rich. Who is he talking to? the king of Sodom. He is right here. He is totally he knows about the situation that's over there, and he's totally disgusted by it. And I'm not going to have it. He said the only reason you're here with me at all is because my nephew was in here and trapped over there, and I went to got him out of there. Otherwise, I don't want to have anything to do with it. Then he says, 24. 24. I will accept nothing but what my men have eaten, and the shares that belong to my men who went with me. I guess their share of the spoil. He lists 3 of the guys, Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them have their share. Okay, so that's what's going on. He just got Lot back for the first time. You would think that Lot would have learned his lesson. You know, I've been in this dirty old town of Sodom. I got ripped out of there by war. What does he do? He goes right back over there. 3 chapters later, we're going to see him right back over there. Not only is he going to be just there, he's also going to be there working as a city councilman. That's crazy. In chapter 19, when we get to it. Chapter 18, before we do chapter 19, verse 18, we see 3 men pay a visit to Abraham. These 3 guys are very interesting. Chapter 18. Let me read verse 1 and 2. I want you to pay attention to this verse because I love this verse. These 2 verses. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of the tent to meet them and bowed down to the ground. He heard the Lord, and he looked up and saw 3 men. Now, who are those 3 guys? He heard one, and he looked up and he saw 3. Can you even make a guess? Oh, that's a pretty good guess. You can't support that, but I mean, it sure sounds like it, doesn't it? I heard the Lord, and I looked up, and there he was, all 3 of him. They're all 3 right there. We're going to find out more about that as we go on. They're there to give a promise and a prophecy to Abraham and Sarah about, they're in advanced age, past the age of childbearing, and they're there to tell Sarah, you're going to have a baby. And not only that, you're going to have it in a year. We may come back by here in a year, and you're going to have a baby by then. And his name, turns out it's going to be Isaac. Okay? Then we get to chapter 19. I really want to read all of it, but we're not going to read it all. Chapter 19, it says the men got up to leave. I think the 2 angels. I'm sorry. I went too fast. Verse 19, not chapter 19. Where is that? Verse 19, chapter 18. The 3 men got up. There it is, verse 16. No wonder I can't ever find anything. The men got up to leave. I assume all 3 of them got up. Then you get to verse 20 and 21, and here's what it says. We're going to find out those men are angels. We're going to see it. God makes you wait to get all the details, all right? But in 20 and 21, here's what it says. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom. So now the Lord is talking to Abraham. He says, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great and their sin so grievous that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know it. How many of y'all by the uplifted hand think God needs to go down there to see for himself, to understand? He said, I can see from here. I can see from here. Why did he go down there? Who was down there? Lot's down there. For some way, Abraham's figured out he's going to destroy the place. I don't see how that works yet, but my nephew's down there, God. That's what he's thinking. He says, why would you? So what they do, they get into this haggling match. The rest of the chapter is Lot said, would you really, what if there's a bunch of, you can destroy the righteous with the wicked? And God says, well, I go down there, and if there's 50, then I won't destroy the place. And of course, he goes down there, and it's back and forth. He finally gets down to 10. He said, if you find 10, I will not destroy the place.
Kenny, I wonder, it's just maybe divine imagination and not at all found in the text, but it's curious that the Lord took that same action with Babel, came down to them, and then it didn't end up to be a good thing.
Yeah.
He confused the language and he separated them. But this time now, I'm going to come down again, and it's probably not going to end up being a good thing.
I love it. I do love that because there was something I wanted to mention. I decided not to, but now I'm going to because it's just like what you're talking about. God knows what he's going to do. He already knows what he's going to do. He knows why he's going to do it. This situation you're talking about, he already knows what's going on there with Nimrod and all those guys building the tower. He knows what he's going to do. He knows why he's going to do it. So why does he go to all these great lengths? There's another time in the Bible, in Ezekiel, his glory is getting ready to vacate the temple. Do y'all remember when we studied this? I read to y'all. I mean, he talks about Ezekiel talks about Ezekiel 10 or something like that. His glory is getting ready to leave the temple, and he goes to great lengths. There's a few places it talks about where he went in the temple before he left. And I read to y'all, I don't know if you remember this or not, a rabbinical tradition about where he went. And it's a lot more elaborate than what our Bible says. But why did he do that? He did it for the same reason that you're talking about, the same reason I'm talking about here with Sodom and Gomorrah and now the temple. He wants me. First of all, he wants the guy that he's talking to know, without question, I considered everything before I made this decision. And now we're reading it. He wants me to know that God considered everything before he made that decision. He knew. He didn't have to go down there to know. It's important to know. When we read something that God did or made a decision to do, we should rest assured that he went to every corner of the temple. He went to every consideration that he needed to think about before he made that decision. Whether it says that he did it or not in the Bible, we should know and trust our God to know that that's exactly what he did. When he said, I'm going to destroy the world with flood, we should know he considered every single thing that needs to be considered. It's important. Okay, that's what happened. So he goes through this haggling match with Abraham, and that's where they ended up. There at the end, he said in verse 32, "May the Lord not be angry, but let me speak once more. If only 10 can be found there?" He answered, "For the sake of 10 righteous." He doesn't want to destroy any righteous. That's the important thing. If they are righteous, I don't want to destroy them. I don't want them to suffer with the rest. Okay, then when the Lord finished speaking with Abraham, he left and Abraham returned home. That brings us to chapter 19. And it says this, let me read 1 and 2. The two angels arrived at Sodom. These are the two that left back up, and they were sitting there talking with Abram, giving them the prophecy about the baby that's going to be born. Then it says in 16 they got up to leave. Well, only two of them. They had three up there. Only two of them end up getting down there. I don't know where the other guy is, but only two of them. And we find out here that they're angels. Could be two legs of the Holy Spirit too. I mean, of the Trinity. They're called angels. The two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway to the city. This is not like a gate where people walk through. This is like an office, a city councilman's office. Missler called him an alderman. I don't know, city council. He has a job. That was his job, to sit at that gate. I guess people would come in and pay fines, whatever they do, but it was an office. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night and then go on your way early in the morning. No, they answered, we're going to stay. We're going to spend the night on the square. He said, don't go there. He's saying, don't go to the square. He's watching out after them. And the rest of the story says the men of the city surrounded, so he's going to end up staying at his house. The men of the city, turns out these are homosexual men of the city, surround his house. They want Lot to bring these angels out so they can have sex with them. The NIV says have sex with them. I looked at King James, I looked at New American Standard, I looked at the ESV, they all said have a relation with them. King James says, so that we may know them, I guess in the biblical sense. It's pretty clear. This is an ugly situation. And these guys are trapped. They're stuck in Lot's house. And Lot finally listens to them and says, look, it just seems like this is going from bad to worse, but he says, why don't you take my two daughters instead? How does that happen? So it brings us down to the angels say no deal, and they strike them blind. It brings us to verse 12 and 13. Chapter 19. The two men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here, sons-in-law, sons or daughters, or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry to the Lord against the people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. Get your family together, because we are going to destroy this city. It's pretty clear. You got anybody else you want to take with you? Get them, and then get out of here. And then he says in verse 14, so Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law. This sounds like the guys that were surrounding Noah of his days. He says he went out and speaks to his sons-in-law who are pledged to marry his daughters, and he said, I think they're betrothed, not really married yet. It doesn't matter. You see the closeness of the relationship between these guys and the daughters. He says, hurry and get out of this place, because the Lord is about to destroy the city. But his sons-in-law thought he was joking. Now, that says a lot. I mean, what if somebody came into your house and said, you need to pack up your stuff and get out of here, because somebody's getting ready to drop a bomb on this place? Say, how do you know that? There wasn't any of that.
In this political climate, I kind of can believe it nowadays.
Yeah. Who you work for again? But there wasn't any of that. Lot says, listen, y'all get it together. We got to get out of here. And the sons mocked him.
No respect.
Yeah. Can you imagine all those people that were clamoring to get in that ark? Said, I was just kidding. I really believe you, Noah. All right, 15. Verse 15. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, saying, hurry, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, and you will be swept away when the city is punished. If you don't leave, that's the first warning. First warning, not over yet. 16 and 17 says this. When he hesitated, the men, the angels, grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. In 17, as soon as they had brought them out, one of them said, "Flee for your lives. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away." Flee. Don't look back. Don't stop. And then they get another warning. Flee. Don't stop. Get out of here. 18 through 22 is very interesting. Lot said to them, "No, my Lord, please." We get this. He gets this plea going on here. He says, "No, my Lord, please. Your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can flee to the mountains. I can't flee to the mountains. This disaster will overtake me." So Lot has and I'll die. He has a pretty firm understanding of what's getting ready to happen. He says, "I can't make it to the mountains. I need to get somewhere else." Look, here's a town near enough to run to, and I think he picked the wrong town, but he picked one that was close by. Should have gone across the desert or something. Look, here's a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared. Okay, so there's a plea going on. He says, "You got me out of town, but I don't want to go where you're telling me to go. Can't I go somewhere else?" He says in 22, he said to them, "Very well." The angel relents, basically. He says, "Very well, I will grant you this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of, but flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it." This is why the town is called Zoar. Now that is a detail I don't think I ever remember knowing about. He told him to go flee to this town. But the thing is, the angel said, "I can't do anything. You're messing things up. Quit all this whining and get somewhere, because my job is to destroy this town, but I have a further requirement that you can't be in it. You've got to be out of there." So his hands are tied. So that's what happens when I talk without reading my notes and get away from what I got written down here. So the mission of the angels is predicated on Lot leaving. So his hesitation is causing the angel a problem. The problem was the angel hands are tied. So saving Lot was part of their mission. The fact that Lot went to Zoar is probably the reason that town was not destroyed completely. I told you that's the only town of those 5 that archaeologists have found any trace of. And it's probably because he went there. Because we already know that he was not part of the bunch that was going to be killed. So Lot was righteous, and he was in conflict with their values. We saw that in 2 Peter. He just did not have the strength of character to leave. The angel let him out of town. All right, now let's look at 23 to 29 to finish out this account of this event, pretty big event. 23 to 29. By the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Then he overthrew those cities of the entire plain. There it is, those cities of the plain, including all those living in the cities and all the vegetation of the land. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. So we're going to stop right there. I've still got lots of stuff to say. We're going to stop right there and come back next week and talk about the rest of this stuff and verse 8. And maybe start verse 9.